So if you're new to flash fiction, in this video I'm going to show you a few examples of flash fiction and talk a bit about how they work so that by the end of the video you'll be able to write your own flash fiction, no problem at all. The actual examples of flash fiction I'm going to use are my own work, and both of these stories were shortlisted for awards at one time or another over the past couple of years. I'm not saying they're absolutely flawless examples of what flash fiction should be, but I've written a fair bit of flash fiction, so I feel like I at least know my way around it. Flash fiction generally eludes an exact definition, but Google thinks it's fiction characterised by being very short, typically a couple of hundred words, and the most reliable and trustworthy source of information in the known universe, Wikipedia, thinks it's work of extreme brevity with a bunch of varieties with a bunch of different lengths. So Wikipedia and Google both kind of wimped out of giving an exact word count requirement, but I won't. I'll say that anything under 1,000 words can be called flash fiction, but definitely anything 500 words or fewer is definitely flash fiction. My examples are both about 250 to 300 words each. What Wikipedia did do in their definition though is mention that despite its short length, flash fiction does still contain plot development and character development. That is my favourite part of flash fiction. It's got ambition and punch and this ability to leave a lasting impression on a reader in just a few words. And in terms of writing, it's a great exercise in being concise and intentional with what you say, and it's just great writing practice in general. For the first example, I need to go back an actual decade to my first attempt at writing flash fiction. It was a total fluke and ended up getting shortlisted for the Bridport Prize that year. I'll read it and then I'll talk a bit more about how flash fiction works in general before we go on to another example. So this story is called Her Cousin's Eye. So her cousin had this glass eye, and one day the kid gets to it. Her cousin had left it on the bedside table in its box with the lid off. This thing was worth a lot. It was custom made to the right colour and weighted just right, everything you'd want. She had to go to London for it because the ones on the National Health didn't get the colour right. So the kid gets in there, waddles his way in, stretches his fat fingers up towards it and holds it in his hand. There must have been all sorts of gunk on it, I say, but she just carries on with her story, just looking at me. He picks it up and he takes it to the bathroom, she says, chucks it straight in there and flushes it, not a second thought. That's what I would have done, I tell her, if I was his age. I'm missing the point, she tells me. I say her cousin's lucky. She wants to know how that is. I tell her cousin's lucky the kid didn't swallow it. All kids swallow things they find. She still doesn't agree it's lucky. I ask her what if the kid had swallowed it and choked to death right there by the bed, she would have lost him. Instead she only lost an eye. I'd call that lucky, I say. She'd call me damaged. I'd agree, but what does that change? So that's a reasonably short example of flash fiction, and before we go on to the next example, I just want to talk a bit about what this story does and what we can learn about flash fiction from it. After all, my aim with this channel is to support other writers and help them develop their writing along with mine. I want to help you tell your best story, so if that sounds like it might be useful to you, hit the subscribe button down below for new videos like this every week. Anyway, so what does this story do and how does it work? Well, I think the main difference between flash fiction and short stories is how much time you have for stuff like plot. In a short story, you've got time for a sequence of events or a narrative to unfold, but you don't necessarily have all that much time in a flash fiction, so you have to keep any plot elements brief and very simple. Because of this, you need to make your mark on a reader in a different way. And people identify with characters, other people, rather than story, so I put my focus into that. The way I like to do that is to give a snapshot into the lives of my character that gives you some idea of depth behind the scenes. So it's like you're looking at one small moment in a much bigger picture. If we think of flash fiction as the tip of an iceberg, the rest of the story's there in shadow beneath the water. We can see the outline of it, but not the exact detail. That's what I tried to do with my story. The focus isn't really on the anecdote that the narrator's talking about. The whole glass eye story is secondary. What the whole thing is really all about, and where the depth really is the relationship between the narrator and the woman who's telling the glass eye anecdote. I tried to tell the reader something about their lives. The conversation is a competition, a jostling for position in a way that some people do when they've been together for a long time. They're both struggling to make themselves heard and using this glass eye anecdote as leverage to try and win this age-old argument. Neither of them ultimately do. The narrator seems to concede at the end by admitting that he's broken, but then he has to have that final word by asking, well, what does that change? I mention this because ending with a question is a really good idea for flash fiction. It doesn't have to be a literal question like mine was, but just leaving some stones unturned and some secrets still buried is often a more compelling way to end your story than just tying everything up into a neat package for your reader. I tried to do that with this next example of flash fiction. This one was part of a novella in Flash that I wrote, or a collection of Flash fictions that I wrote called Gold Fury, that were shortlisted for the Bath Novella in Flash Prize this year. I haven't actually given this excerpt a name of its own yet, so after the story, if you have any suggestions, leave them in the comments below. Here's the story. The kid woke Reed just after dawn, hammering on the cabin. So much for camping then. He dragged him all the way to the west field, talking about a car crash in the night. Reed stood for a moment when they got there, feeling the dew on his legs and a cool wind behind him. Some way off, birds were singing. They sounded nervous, like they were in an audition and none too sure they should be. There would be no steering the car out. It was bogged in the mud. He leaned in and smelled drink, old cigarettes. All the windows were down, engine cold. The glove compartment was open and there were letters spilling out. One of them still sealed. Not his business. He crossed to the other side and collected them, put them back. What did they say? The kid asked, trying to work his way between Reed and the passenger seat. Nothing. Get out of there. Reed straightened up and looked to the highway, squinted at something moving a long way off. Kid, he said. He leaned on the car and closed his eyes until the pain in his legs eased. The boy appeared again from somewhere and Reed turned to him. Run back to the cabin, call Helen or whoever's there. Tell him I need a winch at the west field. The kid nodded like he was glad of a mission. Cops too? Reed looked over the car again. No. Leave them, just call the winch. He watched the kid go and stayed where he was, leaning on the car. Off down the highway, he watched a man walking. Long coat to the ground, he swayed as he went. Nothing but wasteland ahead of him. Above that, the open western sky. So hopefully you see what I mean about that ending. I left things open for the reader to have their own opinion about what's just happened and about the lives of these characters. Hopefully it has that tip of the iceberg quality where the rest of the characters' real lives and the real story behind everything is just out of sight in that shadowy water. Of course, this is all my opinion and my approach to writing flash fiction. Another writer's opinion and advice will be totally different and equally valid. That's the great thing about writing. There are as many ways to tell a story as there are stories themselves. But if I could give you my top tips for writing flash fiction, here's what they'd be. Keep your plot as simple and clear as you can. Concentrate on your characters first. Give them lives that you can't quite see, like those underwater parts of the iceberg that I keep going on about. Be very sparing and concise in the language that you use. Because it's so short, every line or every word needs to be optimized for effect. And try using an open ending to provoke a bit of thought in your reader and leave them with a lasting impression. If you want a couple more examples of flash fiction, I'll link 2 of my other videos about it in the description and one of them up there. Both of those videos contain original flash fictions of mine. If you're curious about my other work, you can read more of my writing on my new website, which I will link to in the description below. There's a flash fiction, a short story and a novel excerpt on there if you're curious. Writing is my passion, and as an extension of that, I love helping other writers to develop their writing along with me. So as I said before, if that sounds useful or you want to be a part of that, consider hitting the subscribe button. Let's tell our best stories together. Thank you so much for watching. See you in the next one.